Welcome back to Torah on the Go. Whether you are taking a break from work, walking your dog, or on the Peloton, we are thrilled to be learning Torah with you. I am sitting here with my partner, Rabbi Feinstein.
Good to have you here.
And we have made our way to chapter 3 of the book of Exodus. Chapter 3 is a fairly iconic scene known to us as the burning bush. God reveals God's self to Moses through this image of a bush on fire that is not being consumed.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, let's understand that this is the first time in the book of Exodus that God shows up explicitly. Everything now, you have a sense that there was something behind the events, behind the enslavement of this people, behind their behind the birth of Moses and his survival, and then his journey. We've been waiting. You've been waiting. You know, when you get to 3 chapters, finally God shows up from behind the curtain and says, I'm here. Now let me tell you what I need you to do. Many of us in the course of our lives have had moments of change, of radical change sometimes, of transition. Here is Moses, the quintessential private man. So he said a couple of weeks ago, Lo ish dvarim anochi. When he says, I'm not a man of words, I think what he means is not that he doesn't speak clearly. What he means is, I'm not a public person. I'm not a principled person. I'm not a hero in anyone's eyes. I'm a shepherd in the desert, quietly. He spends all of his days with sheep, right? He's quintessentially private man. He had one moment when he stepped out in public and he got whacked for it. So he has retreated to his privatism, and that's the way he wants it. Now, how do you take the private man and turn him into a leader? How does anyone meet that moment of fate that calls to you and says, you have to do something important now? It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. You're not going to be the same. I can't guarantee you success, but this is the moment you are called upon to step forward.
And it happens in the wilderness. It happens face to face with something.
Something.
Right? Typically Jewish, significantly Jewish, let's say. It's embedded into our DNA. It is not a command. Moses will not accept the command. You will be the leader. Moses could have said, okay, great, thank you very much. It's a tremendous honor, and walked away. He says, no, thank you. He actually says no, thank you 3 times without the thank you. He says, no, this is not a good idea, right? The first time being basically this is not a good plan. The second time being they will not listen to me, right? And so God answers each of these with different answers. The third being lo ish dvarim anochi. I'm not a man of words, or I'm not a man of outwardly. You know, I'm not an advocate. I'm not a public advocate. However, we want to understand that. Why do you think that Moses refuses? Why is that important to the text, that Moses is not eagerly...
It's clear why Moses refuses. What was his last memory of Israelites?
And his last memory of Egyptians, both of them. They're both not great.
His last memory was he saved a guy's life. The next day he went out and he saw 2 Israelites beaten on each other. He separates them and they accuse him of murder and out him to Pharaoh's police. His last remembrance of the Israelite people was, let's say, not pleasant.
Not pleasant. No, for either side.
And it's the last time that he stepped out into public and said, "This is who and what I am." He got whacked, and so he runs away to Midian. He runs away to the desert. He runs away to privacy. He's living a perfectly idyllic, bucolic, ideal life. Right. He shepherds all day long. He comes home to this wife who loves him, his kids who love him, his father-in-law and the tribe that loves him. Right. He's living this great life. Who the hell wants to give that up to go, what? To confront Pharaoh, the most powerful, feared leader in the world, on behalf of a people that he long ago rejected him? I mean, why does he want this Mishigas?
Right.
Why does he want it? Right? Of course he doesn't want to accept that mission. It's just to God, you got the wrong guy.
You got the wrong guy. That's basically the message. And God answers him each time. God shows him, the signs and wonder that he'll be able to perform miracles, right? The hand of the leprosy, the staff turning into the snake. All these ideas are shown to him. God tells him Aaron will speak on his behalf. But the overarching message of this encounter for Moses is you are far more capable than you give yourself credit.
Yeah.
Right? I always talk about this as the reluctant volunteer. That we often approach people and say, we'd love for you to be involved in this or that. And people's knee-jerk response, the vast majority of the time is, I'm not sure. They're reluctant. I'm not sure. They don't see themselves like that. They don't see themselves as somebody who can organize an initiative on behalf of the Jewish community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a question of when greatness calls you. And greatness demands tremendous sacrifice. I mean, one of the analogies that I always think about is George Washington. Right. I mean, George Washington was the Moses character. He lived an idyllic life. He was a planter. He had a beautiful home. He had a very prosperous life. He had a marriage to his wife, and he had this wonderful, idyllic life. And the colonies called to him and say, "We want you to come lead us in war against the most feared military power in the world."
Right.
And Washington hears the call of greatness, and he goes. And they're too much like Moses. And when the stories of Washington is a very humble man, because the reason that our republic works is because he refused to be King George of America.
That's right.
He wanted to be president, and when he was finished being president, he retired back to Mount Vernon. When greatness calls, what does it sound like? What is it like? And how hard do you have to resist? And what does it mean to accept the call of greatness?
Right. And why does, especially for our tradition, it plays an important role that the leader accept the task with humility.
Yeah, yeah.
We're not looking for people who glom onto power. I mean, that should be a very worrisome description to people. And I feel like in many ways, we're dealing with a political world today without making any kind of political statement where people are fighting for power as opposed to accepting with a degree of humility, right? And that's one of the many worrisome parts of the world today in terms of looking around the globe.
Yeah, and if you listen to the refusals, right? The first refusal is, "Why are you asking me? I'm the last person you should ask."
Right.
The second refusal has to do with the people. And he says something very revealing, like, they're going to ask me who you are, you God.
Right.
What am I supposed to tell them? My teacher, Moshe Greenberg, the great Bible scholar at Hebrew University, who I had the honor of studying with when I was young, he said that it's a difficult chapter to figure out. Because what he's saying is, what's the secret handshake? They don't know me. I don't speak in their language. I'm of them maybe birth-wise, but he was never raised as an Israelite. When he goes back and says, "I've come to liberate you," why on earth should they believe me? Tell me the secret name of God that will make me recognizable to them, which means he doesn't know it.
Right.
And then the idea that
he doubts his own authenticity as a Jewish leader. I think that's something that most Jewish leaders doubt at one point in their life, or at many points in our lives. We doubt whether or not we are authentically the person that stands before the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And God's response can be understood in many different ways.
Yeah.
God's response is, Eheyeh asher eheyeh. I will be that I will be. Tell the people, Eheyeh, I will be sent you.
Yeah, right.
Now, I mean, so first of all, that's really not an answer, okay? Because that's not a name. We were looking for, Mr. So-and-so is the one who sent you.
Exactly.
We're looking for a name, and God reveals God's self through this kind of phrase. And the phrase is basically, the message is, the eternal will sent you, right? This eternal power of all people, of all leaders, sent you to this position, right? And it's an evolving, and it's chosen you.
Right.
It's chosen you. And in that sense, it could choose any of us. And that's the chapter reveals itself to say God's way is that God can choose any person for any opportunity at any moment.
Yeah. And of course, the irony of this story is that he doesn't question the fact that it's actually God talking to him.
Right.
I mean, most of us, if God talked to you out of a shrubbery or any other thing, you'd lie down, take an aspirin, and it would go away in a few minutes. But he knows he's talking to divinity, or he knows that divinity has called him. What he doesn't realize is how to carry that forward into the people.
Right.
He doesn't realize his own capacity as a leader, a prophet, a teacher.
Right.
And that's going to take 40 years. That's the next 40 years of his life, is not only the liberation of the people of Israel, that's the big story, but it's also the self-realization of Moshe Rabbeinu. So as you said, at the end of the story, I'll give it away, the man who said, Lo ish devarim anochi, I am not a man of devarim, a man of words, is going to stand in front of his people. The Elah hadvarim, the book of Deuteronomy, is his devarim, is his words. And for 2 years, he's going to talk to them.
Right.
He finds his truth.
And in this scene, God also redirects Moses back to the family that he's supposed to be a part of. Moses says, I'm not such a wordsmith. God says, I'll speak with you through Aaron.
Right.
You'll speak to Pharaoh through Aaron. God puts Moses back in the context of his biological family.
Yeah.
And Zipporah obviously comes with him. And this burning bush scene also redirects Moses in terms of what is the purpose of his life. I mean, I'm sure that he thought the purpose of his life was the wilderness experience.
Right.
But actually the purpose of his life was to take the wilderness experience and bring the entire Jewish people into it.
Right.
The purpose of his life was not only to encounter God privately in the scene, but actually to construct the first institution to allow Jews to encounter God on a regular basis in the Mishkan. I mean, the purpose of his life, this upends everything that I'm sure that he had counted on in his life up till that moment.
Absolutely. So this becomes one of the archetypal scenes for our faith. The greatest book of Jewish philosophy ever written is Moses Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, Morid Nebuchim. Don't try to read it at home without help, because it's the most perplexing of books you'll possibly read. But in a nutshell, if you don't mind, if you allow me, it establishes that human beings are created in the image of God. For Maimonides means we have the rational, we can think. And the highest thoughts are when we are thinking pure rational thought, we are actually connected to God. And that, says Maimonides, is the purpose of life. The purpose of life, everything else is instrumental, making it materially in the world, having health and strength, even having a quality moral life, is to prepare one to be able to think the thoughts of God. And for Moses, Maimonides, the highest archetype of that character is Moses in the Bible. And the moment is the 2 moments he's on Mount Sinai. This moment at the burning bush, and then in a couple of chapters when he goes up to get the 10 commandments and the other commandments, Moses, Maimonides, imagine that's the metaphor for the fully realized human being. And that should be the end of Maimonides' book. But Maimonides has a problem, because the fully realized human being doesn't stay up on the mountain. The fully realized human being who has achieved what every human being wants. He sees God face to face. He should stay there. Why on earth would you want to come down the mountain and lead a bunch of Kvetchy Jews through the desert? Right. And Maimonides can't quite figure it out until the very last paragraph of this very long book. He says, well, maybe the purpose isn't simply self-realization. Maybe the purpose is to bring down what God teaches you and raise up the level of your people. It's an amazing confession, because the idea then is that it's not enough to know. You also have to teach. It's not enough to realize. You also have to uplift. It's not enough to come to that kind of divine experience, mystical experience, without the concomitant responsibility to the people you're with. And that's what happens here. He comes down the mountain. Right. Why does he come down the mountain? He comes down the mountain because he understands that his great goal, his purpose in life has changed.
And the scene ends with a trope that it recurs again and again and again in our people. He comes out of the burning bush scene. He's charged to go lead the liberation of his people, to once again find his biological family, and he goes to talk it over with his wife.
Right.
Isn't that an amazing human moment?
And here is your Tzipporah as hero.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't say what you'd think she was going to say.
Are you nuts?
Are you crazy?
Right, that's right.
Right. Right? Look what you have here. Why would you want to go back there?
Right.
Right? She says,
Right. She says, let's go.
okay,
I'll support
honey,
you.
I'll go with you.
Right. And in that way, she fits into the tradition of Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah, who all find themselves part of this journey of the Jewish people.
Right.
She accepts that role. And in many ways, she saves Moses in the wilderness as there's a kind of perplexing moment for them.
An attack of a demon. Yeah.
Right. So it's fascinating because this scene in the burning bush, it's so poetic and it's so human all at the same time.
Yeah.
It's poetic from God's side. It describes beautifully what revelation and call to a higher purpose looks like. And by Moses' response and by Moses and Zipporah's conversation and by all of this, it feels incredibly human. Like it's lending all of us the blueprint for what volunteering and working for a higher purpose, working in organizational life, working for a calling, what that would look like in life.
And the dialectic, as you put beautifully before, the dialectic is, on the one hand, to hear the call to greatness, to hear the call to purpose, and to devote yourself, to give yourself up, to dedicate yourself to that great purpose, but at the very same time, to never fully believe that you belong there.
Right.
So there's always this quality of self-criticism, self-doubt, and humility that keeps one from being consumed by the greatness. In other words, there's something that keeps the ego at bay, so that it's the best parts of us that we put forward to the people we lead, and not the worst, not the ego, not the manipulative side, not the grasping side. It always has to come with that humility of, what the heck am I doing here? I'm just pretending. It's that kind of a dialectic.
And we know this from Moses' story. At the very end of the Torah, V'zot HaBracha, in the final parsha, Moses offers a blessing to the tribes, and he blesses them in the merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Mm-hmm. One would think that at the end of the Torah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob each took a section of chapters from one book of Genesis.
Right.
Moses was 4 books of the Torah. One would think that Moses could bless the children of Israel in his own merit. I bless you through the God of Moses. Mm-hmm. But Moses never does that.
Yeah.
Moses never does that.
Yeah.
He sees himself as part of the tradition of transmitting a tradition that began before him to a people that's going to live that tradition long after him. And I think that's the reason why we call him Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our rabbi, and rabbis assume and co-opt him into the rabbinic tradition because he saw himself as part of a tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember when I became a dad, I promised myself I would never say to my kids, because I said so, that's why, and then you end up in a moment with your kid, and that's what you hear those words come out. Moses never says that. He never speaks in his own name.
Right.
He's always speaking in the name of God. He's always speaking for the welfare of the people. The ego never gets the best of him. That's what the Torah calls him, Anav Mikol Ish, the most humble of all people. It's not because he wasn't willing to stand forward and lead. It's because he doesn't do it in his own name. And that, I think, is such an interesting insight in what it means to be that kind of prophetic leader.
We thank you for spending some time with us today. We hope that you carry on the blessings of higher purpose and humility all at the same time.